Jesus Freak here. Now, you know that to avoid offense, I seldom use any Bibles that aren't KJVs. In my videos. Now, I'm not a King James exclusivist. There are certain varieties of King James exclusivists out there. And there's a spectrum between people who, like me, might not necessarily even prefer the King James, but believe that it's just more practical to use it. To people who do prefer the King James, but don't necessarily have an issue with people using other translations. To people who have a problem with the critical text to the point that they consider any translation made out of it problematic, but don't have an issue in principle with other translations, so they'll be okay with the MEV and maybe the NKJV, although they might have problems with the footnotes there. To people who don't think anyone should be using anything other than the KJV. To people who believe that either or progressively, as Gail Ann God and Ripplinger suggests, or all at once, as Peter Ruckman suggests. The very words, or even letters, as Matthew Verschure, Bible Protector, suggests, are given and directly by Jehovah to his people. And even this has a bit of a variation, because some people are okay with translations that are made either from the same Vorlage as TBS allows, variations of the Reign of Valera, the Almeida version, other versions that are based on the same Greek and the same Hebrew. To people who say, the only valid translations are those that are made directly from the KJV. To Gippism, which says, he was asked if someone who, say, only spoke Russian had to learn English to be able to understand the Word of God. He said, yes. So, there's always a spectrum of extremism here. The problem with the idea of reinspiration the canon closed around the end of the first century of the Christian era. The KJV came out 1,500 years later. It's a millennium and a half. So the question to ask is, most people say, you can at least find evidence that they had the various pieces that make up the Bible, even if they didn't have the whole thing. But if you're talking to someone who believes in secondary inspiration, especially of the Ruckman variety, you've got the quandary that they're implying that for a millennium and a half, nobody had the Word of God. Because God had to give it all over again in 1604 through 1611. And that's problematic for a number of reasons. It should be pretty obvious. I might take issue with the critical text. And I might feel that there are genuine issues of translation, even with the NKJV and with the MEV. And in fact, if I could get the rights to make a modified RSV/NRSV hybrid, I'd probably, take the two, make the best of them. Things that are better in one translation, things that are better in others. And change the Vorlage of the New Testament so that it's based on a text that wasn't developed by skeptics, but developed according to people who believe in the sanctity of the Word of God and who consider it authoritative over all things. I say over all things because for the Church of Rome, it's authoritative, but it's not authoritative over all things. I say that because, Nestle Aland has influenced the Church of Rome. And even, Robinson Pierpont's not perfect because they leave out, because maybe the preponderance of the evidence doesn't contain Acts 8:37, but it does exist, and I tend to think that, it does exist in the Greek tradition. And as such, prefer the longer reading, generally speaking, unless it's really out of place. Like, that one verse in Matthew, it starts with the last to be first and the first last. The second part, that quotes, many are called but few are chosen, is out of place. Or, I have questions about the Comma Johannium. Otherwise, I tend to feel that, the longer readings, which most of the time jives with the King James, and not always, tend to be preferable. And, there's a couple oddball readings that the Textus Receptus gained that I wouldn't support. But like I said, if you're going to talk about secondary inspiration, you're really saying that people didn't have the Bible for 1,500 years. And I'm sorry, I can't buy that. Jesus, freak out.